Alright guys and gals, let's go ahead and get started once again. We're going to cover just a couple of final definitions. Believe it or not, we are still in our first unit of the semester as we're rounding the corner on midterms and all of our other classes. Because there's a lot of just sort of foundational, definitional stuff to get people on board with when we're talking about the human side of forest uses. Because humans are complex and illogical and weird and unique and amazing and fascinating. So we've been doing some pretty big lifting the first half of the entire semester to get into what some of those different contours or wrinkles of human weirdness in forest environments look like. All right, so from here we got just this, and then we'll take a look at a short looks at a long video illustrating our final definition, and probably end class a little bit early today. I don't want to get into our next unit, history and philosophy, until we can sort of throw a whole class session at it. So hopefully a short class session today. We'll see. Sometimes our professors can be kind of long-winded and rambly. It's terrible. All right, moving on. We've got 4 stages from the perspective of the recreationist of sort of the phenomenon of recreation, of a single trip, if you like, a hypothetical sort of classical trip. So, in order to have somebody on site for you to manage as a park ranger or backcountry ranger, interpretive ranger, wilderness ranger, conservation police officer, forest protection officer, right? All the different roles in which we might be interfacing with people in the forest in a recreation kind of a way, with hunting or fishing or backpacking or whatever the activity is. We've got to, as Carl Sagan, astronomer and science communicator, once said, in order to have an apple pie, you first have to invent or create the entire universe, right? So people just don't show up at a park or a forest to do forest recreation stuff. There's all of the everything that brings them to that moment in the place that you are concerned with keeping sustainable and also high quality as an opportunity for people to experience. So we've got these 4 stages. This is out of a study in the 1960s by Clausen and Netsch. And the 1960s was kind of the first time in which we had to start doing research. So if you think of forestry as fundamentally silviculture, like raising trees so we can cut them down, that as a discipline, a profession, is hundreds of years old, right? I mean, this goes back to the German silvicultural schools and development of that profession centuries ago over in Europe. Some sort of East Asian cultures have had something akin to this for even longer than that. If you want to think of how old the art of bonsai is in Japan, right? We've been dealing in systematic ways with trees for a very long time. But in terms of human beings recreating in forest places, that's a really pretty young set of disciplines. And it kind of came about at the same time as the use of modern statistics, modern psychology instead of astrology or alchemy and stuff like that. And that kind of shapes how we think about forest and outdoor recreation. We don't have sort of an alchemical legacy thinking about forest recreation. We do have a whole bunch of myths and legends that touch it that are very, very old, but and even in some of our oldest religious texts, we have mention of the concept of wilderness as a very sort of important and distinct concept. We'll get into that later. But this is a pretty new set of ideas, right? This idea right here, that there are 4 distinct stages, this idea is only 50, 60 years old. All right, so I want to keep this in mind and understand where this came from, the context of the theory. Always trust but verify, as Reagan said with the Soviets, when you're looking at any research study. Okay? So Clausen and Netsch suggested that first, you've got this so-called anticipation stage. We're not in the forest yet. The forest visit might be years down the road from this moment or this period of time in a person's life. So we gotta first discover the idea of something like wood duck hunting or rock climbing or whatever, and just be aware of that as a thing. So think back to any of your favorite recreation activities, whatever that might be, and think about, or try to think about, the first time you heard about that. It's probably pretty far back. Like, when was the first time you heard about going for a walk? Maybe as a real little kid? Maybe you were not even able to speak yet? Right? So developmental neuroscientists are piecing together when human fetuses start to acquire things like language. And it's very, very early. You are listening to your birth mother's intonation patterns, the pitch and variations of pitch and rhythm and cadence of her voice, even if you can't hear anything because, you're in a fluid-filled sac and it will sound like, you're still learning that that particular voice means something. Okay? So, think back to the very first time you heard about wood duck hunting or whatever your favorite activity is. The first time I really heard about backpacking, which is my particular poison, was in my junior year of college, which is surprisingly late. Backpacking was not a thing for me up until then. I just hadn't really ever thought about it or encountered it in any meaningful way. But I had grown up camping with my parents, and so it was a pretty easy conceptual leap from we're going to carry all of our crap in our car or our canoe to we're going to carry all of our crap on our backs and walk and somehow have a good time. So, what was that earliest memory of your thing for you? Anybody in the class? And it's okay if you don't have a single earliest distinct memory, because for some of us this is like, right around or pre-long-term memory formation. Before the age of about 3, it's hard to remember conscious memories. You ever think about that? Anybody?
Like mine was a few years ago, probably 5 years ago.
5 years ago for wood duck hunting.
For duck hunting, and
Right.
it looked like me and my friend were just hanging out. And he's like, "You ever been duck hunting, dude?" And it's like 8 o'clock at night. And I was like, "No, I haven't." I went inside and told my parents, and I'm like, "Okay, where's my dad duck hunting?" He's like, "Me, this, and this." So I'm running around racing, and we went, and I was hooked.
Okay. So did you go maybe not the next morning, but pretty soon after that?
I had all the equipment, just needed a license.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Ran out of Walmart. Next morning we went.
Okay. So each of the pieces that you just mentioned there in that process, they're represented here in this timeline. So let's kind of triangulate this. First, there's the discovery. You hear the phrase duck hunting, and for the first time in your brain, that concept sort of coalesces into a phenomenon. A phenomenon is something. It might be a material object, it might be more of a conceptual thing, but it's something out there in the world. It's a noun, if you want to think of it that way. Okay? And so this is forming new neurons, new connections, new pathways in your brain. And we hear a lot of new things, right? We learn a lot of new concepts, we learn a lot of new words throughout our childhood, for example. But most of those don't go on to the second substage of this first stage called attraction. That is, not only duck hunting is a thing, but my dad sounds like he's pretty into it, and my buddy, who I think is an interesting person, is into it and asked me about it, and it sounds like he might be trying to pull me into this thing. So generally we sort of unconsciously or preconsciously sort out, exclude most of the things that we discover from sort of this reinforcing process of attraction. not only does it exist, but it's worth some time, some effort, some logistics to get that license, to get the gear, which you happen to already have in that case. Your dad already had some of that stuff, sounds like. And that makes it possible because you know it exists in the first place. And second, you start sort of leaning toward it, okay? And that leaning toward process can kind of build in speed, strength, intensity, all right? This is what, for something that you're genuinely interested in, is what psychologists would call a self-reinforcing or positive feedback cycle. And positive feedback cycles are the kinds of cycles that after the cycle runs once, it's easier for that cycle to happen again. Or the next time it happens, that cycle is a little bit more intense. So soil erosion, in a lot of cases, is a self-reinforcing cycle. So let's say we invent a new kind of recreational walking out on the lawn here in front of the ag building. And it involves just like a lot of shuffling. So we have a lot of people, like every day I'm shuffling, right? Like a song, out in front of the ag building, to the point that we kind of kill off most of the grass growing out front. We get this big patch of like dirt. And then it rains. And little gullies form. And those gullies do what's called channelizing the water. So the water, instead of flowing slowly over a rough surface of soil, can flow a little bit faster in what is kind of like a micro stream bed. And so when the water's flowing faster, it can pick up more soil and carry it with it.
The slope gets steeper.
Exactly. Right? So our slope gets steeper as the channel cuts down to become more shallow as it drops down to the bottom of the water table in that spot. But up until that point, it's actually accelerating because it's catching more water. The watershed for that little gully or rill or stream bed gets bigger, transporting more soil each time it rains. Even if it's just raining the same amount each time, the cycle happens harder each time. That's called a self-reinforcing, or otherwise known as a positive feedback cycle. Microtransactions in games that are designed to hassle or annoy you just enough to pull out your credit card or tap the side button twice to activate Apple Pay, that is a neurological self-reinforcing cycle. After the first time you buy something, usually at a huge discount, you get 5,000 gems for $1, then after that you don't get that same deal because you're much more likely to pay, so they don't have to incentivize it as much. Maybe you only get 500 gems for $1 the next time. A self-reinforcing cycle through neuroscience of addiction in your mobile games. Okay? So, we have this discovery stage. Oh, this activity is a thing. And then the attraction substage of, oh, okay, this is not only a thing, but it's an interesting thing. All right, so we have this sort of swiggity swooty, I'm coming for that recreation activity meme here to kind of underscore this. All right. Next, we get into the actively doing something, not just thinking in a positive or attracted way to it. We move into planning. So, this is where you are gathering different kinds of so-called capital. And the capital is the stuff that you need to do the thing. All right? So, you need information. I need to know that I need a license or a permit or a tag or something to go hunting legally. I need to know that information. I also need to know where to get that, how much it costs, what the likelihood of me getting it is. Is this a lottery or is this a sure thing? I slap down my $15 and I'm good for the season. Okay? So, information is a kind of capital. And to the extent that you have an interested, well-informed friend or a parent or guardian type figure that already sort of knows some of this stuff, the friction for you getting involved in a bigger and more intense way, pull that friction away and you slide right into it, right? Because people that you care about or enjoy being with are already there. So it's like they're adding a little bit of dish soap to the slip and slide on your way into this activity. Second, you need to acquire the skills, right? So when you are dealing with a shotgun in various kinds of hunting, for example, you need to have the skill and the understanding and the awareness to know that a lot of shotguns don't have what's called a drop safety. If you set your shotgun on the tail of your truck and actually accidentally bump it off and hits the ground, that's enough to sometimes trigger the shotgun into discharging. Whereas if you heat a pistol or something like that off of a building and it clatters on the concrete, typically there's a drop safety in there where the striker cannot fire that round. There's like a physical plate blocking it when the safety is engaged and the trigger is not being pulled. A lot of shotguns don't have that, right? So you need that information. You have to have at least that much skill with the shotgun in order to not have a very short and aerated or perforated first hunting trip, right? So information, skills, and then of course the shotgun itself. But not just the shotgun, like the activated carbon charcoal with silver, colloidal silver impregnated into your underwear so that you don't like smell like human, right? People get really into the gear, the stuff, right? I mean, we have entire TV shows like Pimp My Ride with Exhibit. I don't know why, but I know exactly why, right? It's fun, it's exciting, it's satisfying to take your beater vehicle and add stuff that you think's cool to it. Like, the world is not a better place for my Segway having ground effect lighting, but it's nice, you know, it's nice. Somebody in a factory somewhere had to install that. Like, we spent someone's life to give my Segway ground effect lighting for no other reason than it's nice, you know? So we have this inherent motivation to acquire gear. To acquire not just gear, but a tacit entrance into the subculture that values that gear. So, look at any of the clothing that you're wearing. Visible or underneath other layers. Does it have a logo on it? It costs the manufacturer extra money to put that logo on it.
Yes.
It costs you attention to wear things with words on them. Your brain has to spend like a calorie or something processing that this is, in my case, a Columbia fleece vest. And does anybody know what kind of clothes Columbia makes as a company? Outdoors clothes, right? On a field trip this past weekend, 2 of my students were in a Columbia tent. So when I wear a Columbia vest, the suggestion to everybody is that I'm wearing an outdoor brand. So I must be an outdoorsy person. You're wearing a Star Wars shirt, so you must be a Star Wars person. At home, I have 2 Galaxy's Edge Disney World lightsabers. I must be a Star Wars person. Say again?
You want to get rid of one?
No, man. They're pretty cool. I'm totally going to rewire them and soup them up with brighter LEDs and stuff. It's going to be great. We're going to get that tip drag effect. Chef's kiss. Right? But we wear signifiers of stuff that we are getting into as a function of acquiring gear. How many of you guys have a motor vehicle? How many of you guys, with your hands up right now, have a motor vehicle that has any kind of a sticker or vinyl on it? Okay? What does that sticker or vinyl say? Anybody?
Mine's the Jeep wing, so I have it on the back of my hair.
The Jeep Wave. Okay. What is the Jeep Wave for those who don't understand? This is a really cool subcultural
Okay,
thing.
so if you drive Jeeps, and it has to be a certain kind of Jeep, is my point of this. But so it like in passing wherever, it either there's different ways you can do it. Sometimes it's the whole hand, sometimes it's like 2 fingers. But to like another person with a Jeep, it's kind of thing. I think they did it like after World War II is like really where it started. But it has to be like can't do Jeep trucks because those are stupid. Can't be the SUV. Like I have a whole thing about this. It has to be a certain kind of Jeep.
So it's gotta be like the classical
So,
Jeep
yeah.
silhouette. Okay. That makes sense to me actually. Right? So in a different class, in the senior level class, we'll talk about something called specialization, where there are people with Jeeps and then there are Jeep people, and they're not the same thing.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So there are
Yep.
people who enjoy going for walks outside, and there are thru hikers. We are not the same. Okay. So can you think of anything in any of the subcultures that you enjoy or you identify yourself in? Maybe you're a MOBA player and certain heroes are trashed here and others are S rank. Maybe you are into figure skating and Michelle Kwan is your God Emperor and Brian Boitano is just facepalm worthy, right? And who knows why? Who even cares why? But the thing is, we put as a means of sorting ourselves into communities, of identifying ourselves as part of something bigger than ourselves. We gather this stuff. So it's not just a shotgun, but among a lot of people, if it's not a Remington 870, it's too bougie. Okay? Remington 870 is like a bog standard classical design shotgun that a lot of people have. And so a lot of people attach sort of this legendary status to like the classical 870 or the classical post-World War II Jeep silhouette. Even though the body shape of a Jeep is really pretty arbitrary and there's a lot of speciation within that particular phylum, it makes sense to identify a certain kind of attitude or lifestyle or subculture of people with a particular kind of thing. All right, how many of you guys and gals know about the ducks on Jeep dashboards? All right, what is the duck thing about? That doesn't even make any sense to me.
I don't really know who started it, but so like Duck Duck Goose, they do Duck Duck Jeep.
Okay.
Don't really know. It's kind of fun to do.
All right.
Makes no sense, but.
Does that square with your understanding as well? It makes no sense, but it's fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of like things, subcultural elements are like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird
Exactly.
relics.
In the Star Wars community, there's this sense of Han shot first, which is an extremely obscure reference
Yes.
to about a 2-second long moment in a scene where Han Solo shoots a bounty hunter under the table in Mos Eisley Cantina. And the movie has been edited over the years a couple of different ways to suggest that Han shot first or the other guy shot first. And, you know, there are people who are willing to have arguments over this. And it's like, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone give a shit? Right? But we get into these conversations. We do. We hand curate our selection of rubber ducks on the dashboard of our Jeep because that's a thing. It's a way to signify I'm a part of the in-group here. I belong to something, or this belongs to me, if you like, that way. So this planning stage is an intensification stage. You're building towards something. It's a process. It's also an iterative cycle. After we get through this trip that we're building to, if it wasn't a total trash fire, we're gonna loop back to this planning, now with a little bit more information and experience, a little bit of battle-tested gear, and maybe a little bit more social capital. Even for a hunting trip where it's a total disaster, the car the Jeep breaks down on the way to the hunting blind, and you guys got to walk an extra like 2 miles, and so you miss the first part of the pre-dawn hunting sort of phase because you're walking to the site. And we'll call a tow truck later after we're done. Hopefully we get some ducks. And then it starts raining on you, like hard. And you look over to your buddy and it's like, bro fist, let's do this, right? Like, this is a total disaster, but we're gonna make it our disaster, you know? And so forever, for the rest of your life, you and that hunting buddy are gonna be able to share that story together of, yeah, remember that time when XYZ, right? So you can see how self-efficacy and developing self-efficacy kind of map onto and play into this planning and then the actual activity and its feedback and so forth. So once you got all your logistics in place, whether it's as short as, hey, let's go duck hunting tomorrow morning. Okay, sure, let me throw my stuff in my truck tonight and we'll get up at 3 and go. All the way up to taking a year off from school, working 6 months at, some horrible retail job, and then hiking the AT for 5 months. Like a year of dedicated planning and buying equipment and stuff like that, packing food boxes. However long this planning period takes, it's typically almost always longer than the actual activity on site. So when you're out there hunting one time, you're out there for what? A couple hours maybe? Yeah. Okay. It takes more than a couple hours to prep your stuff for the season. It takes more than a couple hours to, let's say we're switching over to like whitetail hunting. It takes a couple hours at least to field dress and butcher and process the meat into venison sticks and buy a deep freeze, like a chest freezer, and a generator for when the chest freezer's power goes out and all of this stuff, right? So the before and after are a lot more than the during, which is weird because it's all just building into the during part, the actual thing, okay? So in participation, we're gonna nuance this just a little bit more. We're gonna throw in kind of the immediate travel to and the travel back from into the participation. Because as it turns out, the travel to and from, that's when I, the ranger, have the chance to contact the hunter. Meet him up at the check station. Check in with folks at the fish cleaning station. It's a very common way for CPOs and folks to just interact. Stuff like that. When you're actually out in the blind, it's gonna be a bad time if you rock up on a couple of people with shotguns trying to be very still and quiet and invisible to ducks. You're marching up like, well, hey guys, just checking in, how's it going? So you don't want to disturb folks during the actual event because you've been working so hard to provide them the context, the ecosystem, the space, the hunting compartment for the event, that your presence could actually kind of mess it up, right? So let's add travel to and travel from to the actual on-site experience. Okay. The travel to and the travel from are pretty purposeful, pretty directed, pretty focused moments in the recreationists, the visitors, the hunters' time. So that means our interaction with them at the visitor center's front desk, info desk, permit desk, check station, any of that stuff, it has to be really, really, really targeted and ready and efficient. We're not there to waste people's time, especially as they're traveling in. We don't want to be a speed bump to their experience. That puts us in a negative light when maybe we got to get them some critical information. Hey, just so you know, you're about to head out on this backpacking trip. I see your itinerary takes you by Chesser Park. The water source at Chesser Park dried up about 2 weeks ago, so you have to have at least 1.5 gallons of water per person, about 12 pounds of water. That's a lot when you're backpacking, if you're going to go through Chesser Park. So That is a clear, specific, and targeted bit of information that's very efficient and very important for that visitor's safety to get it to them, okay? So, we're going to train, we're going to plan, we're going to refine our contact skills as park rangers to make sure those brief conversations, it might even just be a 30-second conversation, is all that you get with some visitors. And with a lot of visitors, you get 0 seconds because they're not even going to the visitor center or the check station or what have you, okay? So, all of this, the way that a trip actually unfolds means that we got to be about our business. We got to be professionals as park rangers, and typically that's exactly what you see out there. Okay, so that's the actual on-site activity: pulling the trigger, leading your target, rubbing the dirt off of their bumper sticker on the back of your Jeep that is upside down and it says, "If you can read this, flip me over." You know, we've all seen those bumper stickers. Okay, so from the shortest form of the stages of recreation, the shortest stage, we now get into the longest stage, the whole ass rest of your life. So you have maybe literal trophies from the trip, right? You get a really cool blue-winged teal, and you pay somebody who likes playing with dead animals a lot some money, and they do some taxidermy, and they set it up, like mount it on a plaque, and mount that on your wall. And every time you look up at that, you think, yeah, that was the disastrous trip of 23 when Jeep broke down and flipped over and spilled all of our rubber ducks out onto the road, and we didn't get to Jeep wave anybody. And then it started raining on us as we were walking to our duck hunting blind, and man, look at that blue-winged teal. That's an amazing animal, right? The mementos of the trip can also be more literal memories, right? So, for those of you familiar with Leave No Trace, you know, part of the mantra is take only photographs instead of taking the cool arrowhead that you find, so that the next person can also find a cool arrowhead, and the person after them, they can, and so on and so forth. Also, it's a fair around to take arrowheads, so I'll do that. Okay? So, if you're familiar with a fish story or fish tale, this is the recounting side of things. This is how the skalds recount your glorious deeds to future generations. The recounting tends to not be a dry, factual recounting of logistics. Well, our permit was $38 that year, which was $127 increase versus the previous year, because we had a change in government and everybody wants their hands in our wallets, and so on and so forth. It tends to be a distillation of wisdom out of the trip. So, like, familiar with the idea of an old war story. It's not about how many times you pulled the trigger, it's about the friends you met and the people you killed along the way, right? Yeah. I'm joking, but the recounting, the recollection, the mementos, this is very, very, very important. Like, really important to people. If you've ever been kind of grossed out by that sense of like rampant capitalism and commercialism, when you go to a visitor center and there's like a gift shop in the visitor center and it's like, no, I don't want a coloring book about caves, I want to go see the cave. Well, for a lot of people, some of whom can't physically, safely navigate a cave environment, like at Mammoth Cave, for example, that memento, that coloring book that they get to color in with their grandchild back at the campsite while the rest of the family, who's a little bit more mobile, maybe a little bit more safe in a cave, they go and enjoy the cave. And the memory that you get of the trip, spending time with that grandchild who's too young to go in the cave, you guys are coloring together with a cave-themed coloring book, coloring in bats and stuff like that, blind cave fish. That's a pretty special memory for a lot of people, because sometimes it's not about the activity, it's about your companions with the activity, okay? So this is very, very important, and as it turns out, when you don't provide the ability for people to have legal, affordable, and sort of relevant, sort of well-curated stuff. Like those mini Lego kits of like every species available at every national park visitor center and most Forest Service visitor centers as well. Like, the Park Service is not about commissioning Lego kits. The Park Service is about having people have strong, positive memories associated with their trip. When you don't provide those things, people are going to make and take their own mementos. And that may not be a good thing. It may not be sustainable, right? So, very, very important for us to understand as rangers, how do people think about their trip? How do people want to remember their trip? A lot of people, want to remember their trip through physical, tangible objects, mementos of the trip. Okay? And that means we need to have some way to provide that. Now, as a park ranger, you're not in charge of retail stocking and stuff like that. But if you are working with the Friends of the Shawnee National Forest, Friends of Yosemite National Park, Friends of whatever else, or Xanterra or Eastern National Forest, any of the not-for-profits or commercial companies that run things like gift shops and lodges in your park or forest, you can work with them and say, yeah, okay, so the coloring books, huge smash hit, no problem. The gender announcement fireworks that you're selling in the gift shop, those are causing a lot of forest fires. Could we pull that off the inventory list like yesterday? Okay, thanks, bye. You can work with folks to do that and kind of shape the kinds of mementos that are desired by people to commemorate their trip and to revalue that trip all the rest of their lives. You can make sure that that's sustainable with your on-site ecosystems and so forth. So a lot of the items in gift shops have been vetted for, is this likely to be eaten by any of our wildlife? Is the wrapper for this delicious food likely to be eaten by any of our wildlife and cause a gut obstruction, and then we have to shoot them and people get mad? Okay? So, we have really good ways to kind of do some quality control on ecosystem management through the gift shop. Because if your park has 4.5 million visitors a year, like Acadia National Park, for example, that's 4.5 million people filtering through multiple gift shops throughout the park over the course of about a week-long stay, typically. That's 4.5 million people who are not experiencing the temptation near as much to take a piece of Acadia National Park home with them in a way that we can't sustain because of some irreplaceable resource like archaeological items or petroglyphs. People rock saw petroglyphs out of cliffs and take them home, sell them. Terrible stuff. Okay? Cool. So, that's the stages of recreation. Clear? Good? It's all about the Jeep Wave and the blue-winged teal that you get mounted on your wall, and you look up and you sort of just chuckle to yourself each time, like, wow, that trip was really something. All right. Let's talk just briefly, without really getting into the technical bits of it, evolving or specializing use. Okay, we're just gonna do one slide on this, and that's about it. So, we have this sense of, as technologies, as power density or energy density of things like gasoline or diesel, or these days lithium-ion, or maybe in the near future sodium-ion batteries, as those get more powerful or make it easier to bring more power with you reasonably safely, we get this evolution of use, right? Humans have been walking for several 100,000 years. And so hiking is a pretty old, pretty low-tech, pretty within reach of most people kind of a thing. But as we invent internal combustion engines, very early on, and with steam power as well, right before the internal combustion engine, we get things like off-road vehicles. We'll call them tractors that are going like 2 miles an hour, and they're steam powered, and they blow up every once in a while. But somebody gets the idea during that long winter in between plowing and furrowing rows and stuff like that and harrowing the ground, wouldn't this be cool if we, saw how steep of a slope this thing could get up, maybe in our backwoods lot, in our back 40 acres, that kind of a thing. And so somebody rolls their steam tractor trying to get up a cliff face. And then their great-great-great-grandchild tries to take a truck, like a milk crate truck, back in the 30s and 40s when people were getting milk fresh, from the milkman kind of thing, delivered each day. Let's take a truck like that off-road, just see what we can do, just see where it could go. And then we get motorcycles. And motorcycles have a high torque to weight ratio, meaning you could get up some pretty steep slopes with low gearing and knobby tires. And then if we make the knobbies bigger and the wheel radius larger, so it can roll over bigger bumps easier, and tune the engine or the motor so that it is not amazing at real high speeds like a sport bike might be, but plenty of torque to get up and down short, steep slopes so that we can open up the throttle and get pretty fast on broken terrain. That's pretty functional. Then if we get a pretty gas guzzler but a four-wheel drive setup, we can probably get over even more questionable or borderline terrain. And then we get specialized vehicles that really aren't even designed for highway use at all. They are pretty much just for getting over goofy terrain, like I remember if it was a Polaris or a Kawasaki we bought in 2019 for ourselves in Touch of Nature. Like that thing goes 50 miles an hour over open forest floor. There is no reason on God's green earth why we would want anybody to go 50 miles an hour over the, really pretty steep and uneven terrain at Touch of Nature. But we can, that's exciting, that's cool. And you guys are smiling because you get it too, right? And then we get the evolution on that, the ultimate terrain vehicle, the UTV. And then we get the Tesla truck and the Rivian and the Honda walking truck. Honda or one of those. The point is that we started with hiking and now we have people with wall crawling Jeeps and so forth that can go up literally 175 degree vertical surfaces and not come cartwheeling down. This is a real big thing. So let's take a quick look at carts of darkness to try and understand this natural human propensity to take a technology and just see what we can do with it for recreational purposes. These are unhomed people on the West Coast working pretty hard to do this. Carts of darkness. Get this on the correct screen here. All right, so let's rewind this a couple seconds here. It's important to see the build up here. All right, so this guy's got his child abductor van.
Can't forget it. It's $30 every time you do a nice little shopping cart run. It's not like it's all free. I actually gotta take a shopping cart from some company. And like I say, shoes ain't free unless you're a thief. I'm not going back to jail for it. I don't like the grip too much. It's not gonna slow me down enough. So hopefully I don't run over some girl in a buggy carrying her baby or something like that. A lot of people think I'm nuts.
Of course it's a brother.
First ride since I've been out, and it's just absolutely fantastic. I know you guys. I want to do it again. I love it. Just.
So think about this for a sec. Whether or not you agree with this particular activity, right? It's totally up to you, personally. But can you see he recognized the underlying desire for something that leads to this? That takes this guy and many others like him from discovery through planning and execution, gathering the gear, 5-finger discount style, and then travel to in the vehicle, on-site activity, travel from. And he says stuff like, that's the most fun I've had since I got out of jail, right? So, questionable personal life choices aside, why? How do we get here? What's the underlying pull of this, other than gravity? Why? Why is this a thing? Why is duck hunting a thing? What's the point? What do you do? What do you think? Open question.
Probably like you said, sort of a adrenaline rush.
Adrenaline rush, okay. So risk-oriented recreation is a subtype, yeah. Anybody else?
Bragging rights or your stories that tell later.
Bragging rights, recounting. Phase 4, stage 4, like we were just talking about, okay? You got it. And the community of people that he's talking with, right? That sense of belonging is a very, very, very powerful, inescapable human drive. And if we have to break the law and steal some shopping carts to do it, then some people will, because that's how much each of us needs to belong to some tribe. Whether it's shopping cart people, or Star Wars people, or specifically Han Shot First people, right? We can slice it as finely as we want to, or not. But that desire to be a part of a thing that other people want to be a part of too, we can't get away from that. No matter how hard we try, we cannot get away from that as people. So as park rangers, we just want to be aware of this, right? And understand the itch that this guy is trying to scratch is valid because all of the rest of us have it too. The particular way in which it's showing up may be a little bit more problematic, right? He's putting a lot of other people in danger, a lot of other people in vehicles, for example, in danger as well because he doesn't have any brakes. This is the kind of person with the no brakes knuckle tattoos, right? I didn't choose the shopping cart life, it chose me, that kind of thing. So, we want to be aware of that and understand that, for some people, if you're having to give them a bit of a hard time about their hunting trip because their shotgun holds too many shells or something like that, it's very effective to say, hey, I am for you guys hunting. Let's figure out a way to make this work. Let's scratch this itch, so to speak, in so many words. And let's not do it in a way that we can't sustain. A shotgun magazine that's a little bit too big, or something like that. Okay? Cool. That's it for class today. We'll see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Carve a pumpkin coming up, right? On the 23rd, 6 p.m. Ag 187. Be there or be somewhere else. Join your pumpkin carving tribe.